Hey everyone. I was inspired to make this video by watching an old Sargon of Akkad video which was in my YouTube stream the other day. I realize it's 4 months old, but I haven't seen anyone else make a response video about it, so I might as well do it. Better late than never. Anyway, I don't want to address the politics of right versus left. I really just don't give a shit. Both parties suck for different reasons. And where you fall in the political spectrum almost entirely relies on whether you receive more in government benefits than you pay in taxes or receive less in government benefits than you pay in taxes. All politics is essentially about self-interest and is completely subjective. The subject I want to address is the privatization of public services. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, not really important, just why it happens in general. If you want something, you pay for it, and the person who pays for it gets to enjoy the thing, and the people who don't pay for it don't get to enjoy the thing. That's essentially how, a market works. Goods and services are bought and sold, and that's how it goes. You pay the market price, you enjoy the good or service. If you don't pay the market price, you don't enjoy the good and service. Now, in the last couple hundred years, you had the government step in and say that we will provide certain goods and services, and rather than people who use the goods and services paying for these services directly by paying the market price, we as the government will provide these goods and services, and we will distribute the cost of these goods and services over the entire tax base. So essentially what this means is rather than the people using the services paying for them, everybody pays for them, but because the costs are distributed, the people who use the services pay less, and the people who don't use the services pay so little that they're probably not even going to notice it. You see this all the time in things like everybody who lives in a certain area helping to subsidize the public school in that area regardless of whether or not they have kids. Or everybody paying for the roads regardless of whether or not they use them, even own a car. Taxes just go to pay for everything whether or not the individual uses them or not. And that's essentially how the government pays for everything, through taxes. Let's assume for the sake of this discussion that whether the government runs it or whether the private sector runs it, the goods are the same quality and the same price overall. However, in the private sector, the individuals who use them pay for them, and in the public sector, everybody pays for them regardless of whether or not they use them. So basically, when things are run privately, the prices are higher. When things are run publicly, it's essentially free, but I'm using air quotes because you're paying for it with your taxes. So it's really not free, you're just not thinking about it because often taxes are taken out of your check before you even get it. So it doesn't feel like you've paid for anything, it just feels like you're not getting paid much at all. When the government does something, it costs money, which has to be extracted from productive people. There's no other way. Even when the government borrows or prints money, it has the same effect as a tax. For example, well, everyone understands how a tax works. The government raises your taxes, takes more of your money, leaving you with less. However, let's look at borrowing money. The government borrows money, it's still taking taxes, but from future generations with interest. So this isn't a solution, it's just kicking the can down the road. It's making the problem worse for whichever generation is left holding the bag. Now, printing money causes inflation. When the government prints too much money or uses the printing press to pay debts, prices go up. Now, wages do eventually go up with inflation, but there's a lag. So meanwhile, the government is printing money, and people who are earning money at the time are buying fewer goods with that same amount of money that they earned before inflation kicked in. This is the same effect as a tax. If everything goes up by 10%, you are buying 90% of the goods and services that you were buying previously. If the government imposed a 10% tax, you would have 10% less income, and you would only be able to afford 90% of the goods and services that you could afford previously. The effect is identical. It's also the most regressive tax because inflation does not discriminate based on income. When the price of milk doubles, poor people pay twice as much and rich people pay twice as much. So anyway, we need to establish one central fact that nothing is free. However, as the decades have rolled on and the government has provided more and more services, taxes have gone up and up and up and up. And eventually there's a point where people will just stop giving a shit and stop earning, and they'll find ways to get around the tax code. And this can be demonstrated by taking it to the logical extreme. If the government charged 100% tax on income, no one would work. And thus the government would collect nothing. You wouldn't go to work if the government was simply going to take all your money. So people would just quit their jobs and be unemployed. What's the point of working if you can't keep any money? And thus the government would collect nothing in taxes because no one would be working. So over time, people demand the government provide more and more goods and services. And this continues until there's a point where taxes become too high. Here's where governments reach the fork in the road. They have two choices. They can ration these goods and services out, or they can privatize. They both represent a response to this effect of the taxpayers refusing to pay in the form of taxes for the goods and services they demand from the government. So that's how privatization occurs. It's simply just a matter of the taxpayers refusing to pay the taxes to cover the fair market value of the goods and services being offered. Even if you distribute the cost over a large population, eventually all these goods and services that the people demand begin to add up. So you can either pay taxes, or you could pay the market value for it, or some combination thereof, and that's what everyone's figuring out. But goods and services have to be paid for. If you just refuse to pay for them, if you think the government should just provide these things at a loss, then you're going to have shortages. Nobody's going to grow crops if they're going to lose money on them. No one's going to research and develop medicines if they're going to lose money on them. Nobody's going to build buildings for people to live in if they're going to lose money on them. So in order to have these things that people need, they have to be paid for. And that's really what it's all about. People don't want to pay for stuff, and they have this idea in their head that if the government pays for it, it's free. And it's not. You have to pay for it with your taxes, but nobody wants their taxes raised. Or if they get their taxes raised, they think that the rich should pay all the taxes. The rich already pay about 50% in taxes. The really rich people, the uber billionaires that everybody talks about, like let's soak them, they don't pay income taxes. They don't work. They make their money through investments. So you could make the income tax rate 100%. You're not going to hurt them. They don't give a shit. They don't pay income taxes. They don't have a job. You'd have to raise the capital gains taxes to affect them. But the US is already in the top tier of capital gains taxes. And raising the capital gains taxes would make the US globally uncompetitive, or any country would make them globally uncompetitive. See, we have this thing called global competition. If you raise taxes on investment, people will move their money away from that country. You saw this in the US when President Obama decided to tax global profits if a company was based in the US. A lot of companies decided to move their headquarters to Canada and no longer be an American company. Now, some people said that was unpatriotic, but they could eat a plate of dicks. And if people want to raise the capital gains taxes in one country, people are just going to move their assets to another country. People aren't stupid, especially rich people. Even the trust fund babies that actually are stupid, they usually surround themselves with pretty smart people. Anyway, like I said, this video was a response to a 4-month-old Sargon of Akkad video. I really don't even think anyone's going to care about it, but it was on my mind since I watched the video yesterday, and I thought it would be interesting to share my thoughts about privatization. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.